Hey, friends, welcome to the Natasha Crain Podcast. Some of you are watching this on YouTube, and that is really unusual. In fact, it's never happened before because this is the first episode ever that I have done my podcast in both an audio and visual format. So I started this podcast a few years ago, and it's always just been available on your podcast player. A lot of people have asked me to put it on YouTube, and I've always been very resistant to that. But today, that's going to change. I'm going to do my best to get my episodes up on YouTube as well as regular podcast format. So if you're listening to this and you would like to see it instead of just listen to it, you can go to my channel at Natasha_Crain. Be sure that you can subscribe while you're there. I'm not going to just be putting my podcasts on YouTube. I do plan to make other content as well, so you're not going to want to miss that, I hope. Make sure you subscribe while you're there. Well, today I have a very, very important guest. His name is Judd Saul, and he is the executive director of an organization called Equipping the Persecuted, and he is working directly with persecuted Christians in Nigeria. Before we jump into the interview, I want to give you a little bit of context for how I got interested in this subject recently. I was on X and I was doom scrolling one evening, and I suddenly caught myself because I realized that I was scrolling past all these posts that were talking about the Christian persecution that's happening in Nigeria. There were photos, there were videos, there were people's comments. I was seeing all these posts and I was going right by them, and I stopped myself and I had to think, why am I doing this? I don't really have any clue what is going on in Nigeria right now, but if this is happening, this is a really big deal. I should be more educated about this, and maybe this is something that I can help others be educated about as well. So I just got really convicted about it, and then I asked myself, why haven't I been looking into this to date? And when I really did some soul searching on that, I have to admit that I had this skepticism that I could ever actually figure out what is going on. I kind of felt like, man, there's so much out there. There are so many different stories that are being told. And some of the times I was seeing on these posts that other people would say, oh, this is AI. This is an image from 10 years ago that you're talking about. And it just seemed like it would be impossible to figure out what is what because Nigeria seems like a world away. Just being honest, that is my thinking. But of course, that is really poor thinking. None of us should turn a blind eye to things just because we think we can't figure out the truth. And so I decided that I was going to start digging in. I wanted to find somebody who really knew about these subjects and who would be trustworthy. I saw a couple of people recommend Equipping the Persecuted and Judd Saul, my guest today. And when I looked more into his organization, I saw that on his board of directors, he had Everett Piper and Bill Federer. And those are two men that I have had on my podcast before to talk about different subjects and that I trust. And so I realized this is going to be a really good, credible organization that I can talk to. And so I've been following Judd and his work for a while now, and I'm so excited to bring you this interview. I can tell you that when I finished recording it, I was so fired up and invigorated to get this out into the world because I want so many more people to understand what's going on. And not just to understand what's going on, but to take action. I know that a lot of us want to do something to help, and we're going to talk exactly about that. I'm going to show you how to help, and I'm going to ask you to help. So please listen to this all the way through to the end where we're going to be talking about this. I know you're going to get a lot out of this interview, and I also ask that you would take the time to share it with somebody. Share it with multiple people. Help build awareness and help get the word out about what we can do as Christians here in America to help our brothers and sisters in Christ over in Nigeria. So with that, here's my interview with Judd Saul. Judd, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, like I said in the introduction, I have been on a journey of trying to figure out what's going on myself in Nigeria. And I was really convicted that I needed to get someone on who could actually give us facts that we can rely on. So I'm very, very grateful for your time today. Why don't you just start by telling our audience about how you got involved in this work? Take us back in some history there for you personally, and then explain what exactly your organization, Equipping the Persecuted, does, because most of us can't imagine what exactly that looks like on a day-to-day basis. We hear there are organizations doing this work, but what does that mean for you?
Well, how I got started in Nigeria was in 2009. I say I had my come to Jesus moment, repented of my sins and came back to the Lord. I grew up in a Christian home, but wasn't living my life for the Lord, wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I clearly had a wake-up call with God, and got slapped upside the head, and God pretty much said, I put you on this earth, to do things for me. I didn't put you on this earth to go do things not for me. And I felt very convicted, repented, and came back to the Lord. And then shortly after that, my grandfather, who's a lay evangelist, just a man who loves sharing the gospel with people anywhere, any place, anytime. He loves sharing the gospel. Was working with a mission in Nigeria and brought a missionary into town. And I was very moved by the stories that I was being told, and kind of what was happening out there. And this was in 2011. And I went to my grandpa and I said, I think I can help this mission out a little bit, because like a lot of missionaries that live in the field, stuck in the field, technology and things have kind of passed them by, and they do a terrible job about letting people know what's going on. And I come from a film video production background. So I went to Nigeria my first time to do a mini documentary for that mission. When I got there, I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the country, with what I saw were Christians who literally have nothing, that are suffering real poverty. Yet they wake up every day with a joy in the Lord, thanking God just for being alive and relying on him for what they eat in a given day. They rely on God for that. And to watch them have almost nothing and just have this massive joy in the Lord, it flipped my theology. It flipped my American Christian experience. Everything changed. My perspective on the world changed. My perspective on Christianity changed. And I then just felt a desire and need to go back year after year, serving with the mission. But what I did notice is a rise in an increase on the killing of Christians in Nigeria. We saw these attacks increase. We saw massive amounts of internally displaced people, which I'll get to that later, which is essentially you're a refugee within your own country after your village is destroyed. And we saw these attacks increase, and I kept on asking the question. I said, what are we doing to help these people? And a lot of local missionaries living there really didn't want to get involved, because they were afraid politically it might jeopardize their mission. It was too dangerous. I've heard the whole litany of excuses from other missionaries that were in Nigeria doing this. And the Lord just kind of put a burden on my heart of, we can help do something. We can really help these people and come to rise to the challenge of actually helping our persecuted brothers and sisters. But the Lord also laid it on my heart to not just be a Band-Aid organization, but to actually have the goal of stopping the persecution. And so in 2019, we created Equipping the Persecuted.
And so what specifically do you guys do? So when you say that you want to stop the persecution, what are you doing toward that?
So on the one hand, we have our humanitarian wing that responds to attacks within 48 hours. We bring food, medicine, whatever we have at our disposal to be able to help people that have just been attacked and lost everything they had. We serve 320 widows monthly, many of them whose husbands were pastors that were killed. And I have an orphanage of 30 children. We have a college of health and science. I have 2 K through 12 schools serving 500 kids from IDP camps. Their schools, everything was destroyed. They had no education. Well, Lord laid it on our heart to build some schools and help them out. So that's our humanitarian wing. But on the proactive wing, to stop persecution, it was working with village security teams. So how it works is you have the Nigerian police, you have the Nigerian military, which are well armed, and these are the people that are supposed to be keeping the peace in the country. But when we found out with many attacks on villages, they just disappear before the attacks happen. And the military and police you cannot count on to defend the local population and the local villages. So what came out of that is village security teams. Now, forgive me, Natasha, but they're called the vigilante service. Now, in America, that word has a negative connotation. That's a negative word. In Nigeria, it's a positive connotation. This is people from the village, local men, women that have dedicated their lives to protecting their villages. And the Nigerian government recognizes them as a legitimate group of people to watch their villages. They just don't get armed, and they get no government support. So we found it we started finding vigilante groups and more of these groups popping up. They had no training. These are just people that want to protect their villages, but they had no training. They have no equipment. They have, it'd be like somebody just deciding they want to go protect their village with, no resources whatsoever.
Right.
And so we came in and said, what if we gave them training? What if we come alongside them, minister to them, teach them how to be a cohesive operation, provide them radios, bulletproof vests, and have them communicate not just within their own local village, but create a network so they're communicating with other surrounding villages. Because if one's attacked over here, they may not know it. But if we can create a communication gap where, if these people are getting attacked over here, they can notify another village over here that an attack is imminent. And so we created this network, and that is one of the ways that we help try to stop the persecution on the ground, just on an immediate level.
Okay, so if you had to just break it down to the basics, it sounds like you work on both the preventative aspect through the security, like you're talking about that you were just describing, and then also on the other end of it, they've been attacked, and you're there to help them in the aftermath of that, and then also in the longer term rehabilitation, because you mentioned schools and orphanages. Is that a fair description of what you're doing?
Yes, that's a fair description. Sorry, I couldn't sum it up in a nutshell.
No, I love hearing the details, and I want to come back to actually more of those details when we get to the end, when everyone kind of understands more of the background of the conflict here. But that's so helpful just to give some perspective of, what does an organization even do who's serving in this way? So that is very, very helpful. And, when I went looking to interview someone on this subject, I really wanted to make sure it was somebody who's been to Nigeria, who has seen this firsthand, someone who's been on the ground there. And I know according to your website that you say you've been there over the last 10 years and 3 to 4 visits every year. So when you go personally, what do you do when you go there, and how much of what we're going to be talking about have you actually seen firsthand? I know that's important for people to hear, just for the credibility factor.
Oh, I've seen it all firsthand. I've seen all the damage firsthand. But what happened? So when we go on to Nigeria, is each trip is designed for a specific purpose of why we're going. So it could be security-based mission. We're bringing some folks to help train local village security teams, and we surround our whole trip around that. Another time we go, it's for medical mission, where I'm bringing some doctors, nurses, and medical professionals, and we go and train and work with other local doctors and nurses, and we go do medical interventions. So we do regular medical interventions in these camps, and we send teams out every month, but we go in and we go assist and help oversee some of these interventions and bring supplies and things with us to go do these medical interventions. One of the other things we do annually is we have a pastors conference. So we have what we call the Cornerstone Pastors Network, which consists of over 1,000 pastors throughout the middle belt of Nigeria that we bring in. We pay for their accommodations. We feed them for 3 days. We bless them, give them good teaching. I try to bring some pastors and people from the U.S. to come speak and teach other pastors, but come alongside them, pray with them, and be a blessing to those guys, because these guys are living on the front lines with targets on their backs, being pastors. Yes. So we have our annual pastors conference, and then other times it's gathering all of our team, everybody from all of our offices across the middle belt, bringing them in, blessing them, finding out what we can do better in certain situations here, how we can be more effective here. What do you guys need? We have a staff of over 150. So one of our regular meetings is where we bring all of our staff of 150 in and go through and say, okay, how can we better serve here? What do you guys need here? Put together a wish list of things that we can bring back. And so that usually consists of what's going on, but then there's other emergency meetings that occur where there's major events that take place and needs our immediate response to go down and see how we can help out.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. And I hope that what people are hearing is that you are somebody who's been there, you've been on the ground, you're there consistently, you understand what's really happening, because I know from talking to people that a lot of people have the same concerns that I talked about at the beginning, of just not knowing, how do we know exactly what's happening? So with all that credibility and context set, let's get into the conflict itself and help us to understand. Talk to us like we are babies in knowledge on this, that we, imagine somebody has has no idea what's going on. They know vaguely that there's some kind of Nigerian Christian persecution. What do we need to know about that? Because there are a lot of complexities to it. So help get us up to speed about the key things that we should know.
Okay, so in a nutshell, what's happening in Nigeria is a real life jihad taking place. Okay, so if you look at Northern Africa, most of these countries used to be Christian countries, but over time, Islam has conquered every one of these countries and has pretty much eradicated a lot of Christianity in most of these countries. Well, what's happening now is they've worked their way south, and now they're in Nigeria. And it started off with what I refer to as a cultural jihad, where they moved in, kind of assimilated, blended in with the communities, but then gained a certain amount of population and then started gaining political control of the North. And then when they got the political control, they started systematically killing and taking over Christian communities over the course of the last 30 years. And what you've seen, I say, since about 2011, 2010, is a ramp up in these attacks where they become more frequent and more brazen. And so started taking over northern Nigeria, where these states used to be Christian states, are now fully Islamized under Sharia law. And they're just continuing to conquer. I call it death by 1,000 attacks. And it's the reason a lot of it's not, you don't see a lot of what's going on is because it is death by 1,000 attacks. They'll go and they'll kill 10 here, 50 here, 40 here, little village by little village by little village. Then all of a sudden, before you know it, they've surrounded the larger cities, populated these areas, and then eventually they get political control, implement Sharia law, and then shove more Christians out.
And so before you go on, let me ask you a question about that. So when you say they have political control, how does their government work in terms of the relationship between at the national level versus the individual states? So when you're saying that they're under Sharia law, those are specific states that you're talking about. Do they have complete control over a state, and they have no legal requirement basically to answer to the federal government? I'm just kind of trying to compare it in my own head to what we have in the United States with the federal versus the state. How does that compare in their ability to impose Sharia law?
So they, over time, they after their civil war and they gained independence in Nigeria, they adopted their model of government after the United States. They tried to mimic our, Constitution. They have a Congress, they got a president, they have their own state constitution. But over time, what happened is they started blending Islamic rules, Islamic laws into, as they gain more population, into their state government. And what essentially you see is that states that have implemented Sharia law, that trumps Nigerian law in those states. And the Nigerian government has never challenged those states that are implementing Sharia law, even over non-Muslim citizens living in those states.
Okay.
And
so there's no, it's something you can't really peel back in any kind of easy way, because if the overarching government is not willing to get involved with it and kind of sort out, well, what is this relationship between the state and the federal government? Then what are they going to do?
Therein lies the question. What can the federal government do? Well, you think at the very least do you think that they would be willing to send in police and military to defend the innocent victims that are being slaughtered on a daily basis and intervene and go after the terrorists? Because the terrorists are violating Nigerian law by running around with machine guns, which is against the Nigerian government law, but somehow they run around unimpeded carrying rocket propelled grenade launchers and machine guns, killing people, and that law is not enforced. So at the very minimum, the Nigerian government should say, just based on human rights violations, they can come in and put a stop to the terrorists, but they're not. They're complicit in kind of allowing it to happen. And why it's garnered so much attention lately is because they've been more brazen and more frequent in their attacks.
So how many states are in Nigeria and how many are under Sharia law already? Do you know that?
There are 36 states in Nigeria, and the entire northern part of the country, north of Abuja, are all Muslim states that have all implemented Sharia law.
Do you know about how many is that? Is it
I think it's
30%
like
of
I think it's like
Nigeria?
I think it's somewhere around 12 states, 12 to
Okay.
14 states that have implemented Sharia law. But as they've gained power, because if you have the guns and you have the ability to influence in negative ways, they've managed to work their way into federal government levels and also infiltrate the military and the police by putting their people in positions.
So are they killing people when they are in the process of trying to gain the power, or is most of the persecution happening after they've gained the power to maintain the power?
It's they've gained certain amount of power, but now they're at the point where they've gained so much power and influence, they're allowed to go killing unimpeded because they have high ranks in the military, they have high ranks in the Nigerian government. The last 3 presidents and vice presidents in Nigeria have been Muslim. Before, there was a thing where they would be like, oh, if you're having a Muslim president, we need a Christian vice president. Or there's a Christian president, need to have a Muslim vice president, was the way they tried balancing things out. But for the last 3 terms, it's been Muslim tickets. And that's why you've seen a massive increase in killings.
So what is their goal then? So once they take over a state with Sharia law, are they trying to eliminate the Christians from within their state? I guess I'm just trying to figure out in my own head, okay, is the killing happening because they're trying to get rid of any opposition and they want the control in the first place and then they don't care what people are doing? Or is it both, that they're killing people so that they can get in power? And once they get in power, it sounds like you're saying they are still killing people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
so
they're
it's
still,
both.
okay. So they're still killing people. So how Islam works is, so once they gain full Sharia law, they gain, full power of the state. They either kill, shove out Christians, or the Christians that still live there are now under what they call jizya, which is they are paying fines to still live on their land and exist. And if they don't pay their fines, they get killed. The wives and daughters are raped. They are subjugated to the most awful treatment. And that's what's happening right now in the full Muslim controlled states. The ones that haven't moved out are now subjugated, and they are living like in second class citizens, if not slaves, under their rule.
Okay, so then how many states would you say there is an active campaign right now where they're in the process of gaining control so that they can impose Sharia law?
I would say there are 5 states right now where they're doing this: Benue State, Plateau State, Kogi State, Nasarawa State, and Kaduna State, Nigeria. And this is the very middle of the region, just north of Abuja and west and east of the capital. And this is where all the killings are taking place right now.
So is the ultimate goal here for those who are coming in, this is Boko Haram that you're primarily talking about right now, right?
No. Okay, so there is Boko Haram. Boko Haram is one of the major terror organizations existing in Nigeria, but there's also ISIS of West Africa.
Do they work together? Are they working together in this, or are they battling it out for control?
Sometimes they work together for the same cause, but none of these guys ever get along. So they'll work on things together, then they'll fight each other, and they'll work on things together and fight each other. But the main tribe that consists of ISIS of West Africa and Boko Haram is the Fulani tribe, which they're not indigenous to Nigeria. They came from Chad, Niger. They come from the Sahel region. And they're nomadic herders, but have a very radical Islamist worldview, and they practice a very radical Islamic religion. And they are the ones that are moving down. So different groups from the Fulani will sprout up. They'll have their own little terror group, but it's the Fulani tribe that are the radical Islamists that are doing it. So you can't pin it just on Boko Haram because they're fixated up north. It's the Fulani tribe itself that is conquering.
So when we're talking about Boko Haram, you're saying that ethnically they are all from the Fulani tribe? Am I understanding
Yes.
that correctly? Okay, so this is mind blowing right now because I've been reading quite a bit on all of this to understand, and it's kind of my understanding. Okay, well, you've got the Boko Haram, you've got the ISIS of West Africa; those are in the north, and then you have the Fulani issues that are going on in the Middle Belt. But I didn't realize that even the formal organizations of Boko Haram and ISIS of West Africa, that those are all ethnic Fulani.
Yes.
So all of this is the Fulani tribe.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
that is really helpful to understand. So, what's the distinction then? I guess I guess you have the two different organizations there, formerly known as Boko Haram and ISIS of West Africa. But then the people in the Middle Belt, whenever you read about those stories, you just hear about the Fulani herders, for example. So why the distinction? Are these just the ones who haven't formally identified with the other organizations? I mean, ethnically they're all the same from what you're saying, but they're not always identified as such. So is it just kind of I have not joined this particular organization?
Yeah, well, they haven't joined the particular organization, but what you have is you have Fulani, you have the Ardos, which are community leaders, and you have the Fulani imams that meet on a regular basis to discuss and plan out the attacks. So it's not Boko Haram that's doing this. These are Fulani imams and Ardos, the community leaders that get together and plan out the attacks, and they'd be like, okay, it's time for us to take this territory, and they orchestrate, plan attacks, and that's what they do. So it's not Boko Haram orchestrating this. These are just imams and Ardos that are getting together and determining who to kill next.
Okay, so to summarize what we have learned so far, that ethnically all of these different groups are from the Fulani tribe, that this is coming south into Nigeria from the other Muslim nations, and therefore that's why you've seen the northern states in Nigeria, especially where that killing has taken place already and is continuing to take place because those are the states that have already been taken over as this is moving south. Now it's moving into the middle belt of the country, especially, and that's where you're saying there are 4 or 5 states where they are in this active process of being taken over so that the Muslims from the Fulani tribe can impose Sharia law. Is that an accurate summary?
That's correct. That's exactly what's going on. And we've mapped out 300 communities, Christian communities, been completely wiped off the map. They're gone.
Wow.
300 Christian communities completely gone, and many of them renamed Muslim names.
Wow. And those are in the states that are already under Sharia.
These are all the states that are under Sharia. Entire Christian communities wiped out.
Are there any Christian communities that remain that have been left alone in maybe a couple of those states where they're saying, hey, we're just going to collect your taxes. We still want you there because we're going to make money from you? I mean, are there still some Christian communities?
Those communities are paying jizya.
Are you able to go in there at all with work, or is that impossible given that it's under Sharia law now?
We have ways of getting in.
Okay.
I wouldn't show up myself to that because I'm draws red flags, but we have ways of reaching these communities, and even from a gospel work, we still support pastors and churches that are still surviving in these northern states that we do work with.
Wow. So you're working both in those states already under the control and in the ones that are currently under the attack where they're gaining control. Okay.
Yes. We're a Christian organization. We still do mission work and share the gospel, and we empower missionaries that are up in those areas.
And I would take it that we haven't talked about the southern part of the country, but I'm sure that that's just the direction as everything gets under the control. Ultimately that's going to head south. Is there any reason to believe that it will be different in the south of the country?
Well, I'll explain it this way. They want to turn Nigeria into a caliphate, and they believe that if they take Nigeria, all of Africa goes. And I firmly believe that if they take Nigeria, so goes the rest of Africa.
Wow.
Give your audience a little bit of background. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa of 220 million. And it's one of the countries that has the greatest wealth of natural resources under the ground and out in the sea with the oil, lithium, gold, diamonds, you name it. Nigeria is a mineral rich country. And if they get that, so goes the rest of Africa. But as far as what they're up against right now, so they're working their way south. Now, you have to understand, Nigeria was put together. The country was invented by the English, where they took all these tribes of different areas and said, you're going to be a territory. You're going to be a country. And before, these tribes lived as separate nations. They had their own areas. They had their own things. They had their own conflicts. They had their own boundaries. And the English came in and said, no, you're one country now. So you have different tribes, different ethnicities that have been forced to live together. And what you see is down south, you have Yoruba tribe, you have the Igbo tribe, which are two of the largest tribes in Nigeria. They haven't quite hit that area yet. And if they keep conquering the middle belt and they get down to that area, I pretty well assume it's going to be a very nasty civil war, and millions of people are going to die if something isn't done soon.
How many years out would that be, or months? What kind of time frame would that be if that were to happen?
Conservatively, 5 years. Liberally, maybe 2 years.
Okay. That's helpful context. I mean, there's a sense of urgency to this, right? It's not just,
Yes.
it's easy to, when you don't know much about what's going on, like me, it's easy to think, well, this is just going to be a very long term kind of conflict. And, hopefully we can do something in the middle. You're saying there's a real sense of urgency because there are, aside from every individual life, there are long term implications for all of Africa, even.
Yes. Yes. And that's why we've concentrated all our efforts in Nigeria. Because right now, 90% of all Christian persecution deaths worldwide have been in Nigeria the last 5 years. And if something isn't done soon, we're going to see a lot more lives lost. And that's why we're there putting everything we have into it and screaming at the top of our lungs that this situation needs to be dealt with. And I can only do so much as a missions organization. And that's why we're calling for government involvement.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the government involvement. I want to come back to that, but I want to address some objections that people will undoubtedly see online because I know when I was first starting to look at some of these posts on X, especially where I would see different accounts post about things like pictures and even videos saying, hey, this is what's going on. If you look at the comments, there are people who are supposedly from Nigeria who are commenting and they're challenging a lot of what we've been talking about here. So I want to go through, I know, but we need to go through it because I know other people will see these things and they'll wonder about it. And so I just want to address it head on and then we'll come back to the solutions to it. But first, I just want to make sure we have a really robust understanding of what's going on. So, one common challenge that I see comes from people, and I'm sure you probably hate this one the most because I can guess what you might say about it, but it comes from people who say, hey, I'm a Nigerian Christian and none of this is happening. So here are a couple of quotes that I pulled off of X under one of these posts. Someone said, quote, I'm a Nigerian Christian residing in Nigeria, but this propaganda of yours and the American people is unfounded and ridiculous. You guys used similar tactics to decimate and destroy Libya, end quote. Another one said, quote, reading this as a Nigerian Christian that has lived all his life in Nigeria, never traveled abroad before, I'm wondering, is there another Nigeria? End quote. So what's going on here? Are these
Okay.
fake accounts like bots that people are just using for propaganda for maybe the Muslim cause in this? Are they actually Christians who maybe live in Nigeria and are actually unaware of what's going on? What is this about?
Well, I'll be very blunt and I'll put it this way. The Nigerian government is spending lots of money to counter the narrative that genocide is happening against Christians in Nigeria. So they have been spending millions of dollars paying people to go online, to make statements, to say that there is no Christian genocide happening in Nigeria. They're even paying off Christian leaders.
And you know this for a fact. You're not just
Know this for a fact,
hypothesizing.
100%,
Okay.
100%, 100%. So, I run, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, I run a website called truthnigeria.com. The government contacted one of our top journalists to offer him money to counter the narrative.
Wow. Wow.
I am not kidding.
And so you have firsthand knowledge that the government is working to have people online, even just on social media. I mean, it sounds so funny that an entire sovereign government would be paying people to be on X making comments under posts, but you're saying no, that's legit. That's what's
No,
happening.
it's very, very legit. Remember, Nigeria is a very impoverished country, very impoverished, and you get a pastor who's not making very much money. Nigerian government says, "Hey, we're going to give you money to go do this." He'll be like, "Oh, okay, sure." Like,
Yeah.
they're pastor in name only, and they're Christians in name only. But this is very common in Nigeria for people to get paid to lie, and they do this all the time. And they like to lie to themselves. And they'll have a lie that's so great, so wonderful. They even have a party celebrating their lie. This is how Nigeria works. It doesn't make any sense to us really in the West how some of this happens, but this is a very common thing in Nigeria. And there are people for a little bit of naira, which is Nigerian currency, will sell their people out in a heartbeat just to make a couple extra bucks. And I've seen this firsthand. And like I said, it happened to one of our guys at Truth Nigeria just within the last 2 weeks.
That is incredible. Is it fair to say then that if someone is actually a Christian in Nigeria, they know what's going on? Like, there's no way that maybe they just live in a village somewhere in the South that's predominantly Christian. They're just not hearing about what's going on in the North. I mean, there's
Well,
no way that any of that's
we
happening, right?
we have the other trouble of this. Okay, so remember I said you have Southern tribes, you have the Yoruba, you have the Igbo, and some of those other ones. They're not being affected by what's happening
Right.
up north. Their people aren't being killed. Their people aren't being targeted and slaughtered. So tribal wise, they're like, oh, that's happening to them. Oh, if it comes to us, yeah, we'll stop them. We'll beat them. But they're not going to come to the aid of the other tribes being attacked up north. Okay, so you have that problem. The other problem you have is in the South, especially, you have some of the largest churches in the world that are Christian that are hyper prosperity churches. Okay. And I have seen some of these hyper prosperity pastors say that the Christians are being killed up north because they didn't have enough faith and they didn't sow enough seed.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
And
wow.
so they live in their own little bubble down there with a very bad hyper prosperity theology that is infected a lot of the South. And we see some of this, even in the Middle Belt, where you do have some large churches in the Middle Belt that haven't been attacked or been affected, but those pastors won't say one word because they're afraid it'll jeopardize their church, their current operation.
Wow. This is a striking example of how bad theology actually kills people.
Yes, bad theology does kill, which also goes into the part, what makes our mission controversial to some is that we do work with village security teams. We do get involved in wanting to protect Christians, and some bad theology is entered in Nigerians where they thought it was a sin to get involved in politics and a sin to get involved in even self-defense of your families and homes. And we're trying to correct that theology on the ground with pastors and churches.
That's amazing. Have they been I wanna keep going through objections, but I have to ask, are the pastors receptive to this when you come in and say, "Hey, this isn't what the Bible teaches. Can we
I
can we
have
talk about it?" Are they receptive?
I have had pastors in tears hugging me going, we knew something was wrong with this idea. We knew something was wrong. And thank you for explaining this to us. And it gave
Wow.
them a peace and a comfort. I'm serious, crying in tears going, because some along the way, some missionary said that they shouldn't defend themselves. And they took that as God's word.
Unbelievable. I'm blown away by that. So then there are kind of multiple layers to the answer to this question about what's going on, because truly a lot of this is fake. It's just people being paid to say this by the government. But then you do have some of these tribal loyalties where people are saying, "Hey, that's not my tribe. I'm not going to get involved." Then you have some people who have the bad theology of saying, "Well, that's actually their fault." So there are a lot of layers to why any given account might be saying something like this, but the reality is that it's happening regardless of what all of these people are saying. Fascinating. Well, another challenge I see, and maybe this is the biggest one that comes up, is from people who are saying that this isn't actually targeted at Christians. Muslims are dying too. This is not a Christian genocide. So here is a quote as a sample of what people might see. Quote, if it's a Christian genocide, then why were Muslims recently burned alive while performing Jumat prayers in northern Nigeria? Innocent Nigerians are being killed, kidnapped, and displayed daily in churches, mosques, schools, and even highways by terrorists and bandits who have no religion or ethnicity. Our pain is collective. This is not a religious war, but a tragedy rooted in insecurity, poverty, and failed governance. We don't need foreign interference or people pushing divisive narratives from abroad. End quote. So there are a lot of claims going on in there, but the bottom line core idea of this is this isn't about Christians. There are a lot of things going on and it's actually happening. They're not denying that, but they're saying that Muslims are dying too, and this is about a lot of other factors. How do you respond?
Ratio of Muslims to Christians being killed. Okay, so I'll just put it this way. For every Muslim that's killed, 5 Christians are killed. Okay, so for every Muslim death, there's 5 Christians that are killed. Now, you have to understand, these guys don't get along with one of them. Even, like I said, there's multiple terror organizations run by the Fulani that think they're not as hardcore as this one over here. They're not as extreme as this one over here. They still battle each other for power and territory, and they'll go attack each other's thing up here, but they still have the overall agenda of taking over Nigeria and eradicating Christianity. So it's a half truth. Yes, there are some Muslims that are killed, but what you don't see is entire Muslim communities being wiped off the map. That doesn't happen.
So when Muslims are killed, why are they being killed? Are they collateral damage of the infighting between the different
Yes. Yeah.
organizations, or are they
They're
actually being targeted because you're not living the way that we think that you should?
they are collateral damage between rival organizations, or, oh, that faction is rivaling our enterprise over here, so we're going to go attack this group of Muslims over here. But what I can show you is that, for maybe 4 mosques that might have been destroyed, well, there's 19,000 churches that have been destroyed.
Hmm,
Okay, so you
that's
take a
helpful.
tiny half truth and
Right.
try to exploit it, and the last thing the Nigerian government wants is U.S. government intervention and international community attention to what's going on, because the politicians up top are profiting from this.
And how are they profiting?
One, local politicians that are affiliated with the terrorists are on the take from the Fulani. The Fulani are getting money from the jizya, the kidnap ransoms, all the stuff that's going on. Or how about the Chinese that are illegally mining on once Christian lands that are now controlled by terrorists? There's money flowing through the north, and the politicians are on the take for this. So they do not want the light being shed on the darkness that's occurring in Nigeria.
Because the corruption, basically, because there's so much corruption.
Of the corruption.
Yeah. So they want to make all of the money, and so they have every financial incentive in a poor country to cover it up and allow it.
Yes. But they also have their lives, threatened by these terrorists with guns that are not afraid to go kill them. So there's financial incentive, there's extortion incentive. There's all sorts of reasons why this is happening. But the last thing they want is the U.S. government and the international community coming in, upsetting the apple cart. But that's what I want, because if they do that, lives are going to get saved.
Right. And that brings me up to another objection, actually, that I've seen about a lot of times I see in the comments, oh, it's just these U.S. leaders who are speaking up about this and wanting to do something. It's just because they're greedy and they want access to the minerals and all the resources that we have here in Nigeria. So someone said, quote, Nigeria should trade with caution. All this sudden love for African Christians may be the opening act to a soft landing of military forces and lethal weapons to forcefully secure extraction rights. Do you have any concern about that? How do you respond?
Well, from international or geopolitically looking at things, right now the Chinese are there. The Chinese are there mining illegally, sometimes legit. Nigerian government officials are getting paid off, but at the expense of lives being lost. And I'm going to tell you this: the Chinese are, when they hire miners to work in their mines, they treat the Nigerians like indentured servants. They treat Nigerians like they're nothing. So China's already there getting minerals and extracting things. And they're paying. And the thing is, China, when they move into a country and they do mining, they don't do things above board. There's a lot of backhanded bribery and money that flows and does these things. So is there U.S. interest in mining minerals? Yes, we have interest in, U.S. has interest in all over the world in getting more resources to help expand our country. But we don't do business by doing bribes and backroom deals. That's not how this works. So,
and you wouldn't say from what you've observed that the leaders in the U.S. who are speaking up about this recently and who want to do something, you would not say that they're doing it because they want access to those rights. So that is their primary purpose.
No, I don't believe that's their primary purpose. But I would say Trump would look at a situation like Nigeria and say, we'll invest in your country in return for mineral rights. We'll bring security. We'll bring peace to your country. We'll put all this money in, but we'd like a return on investment for mineral rights, which there's nothing wrong with.
But that's different than a forced military control to secure these rights like this person is suggesting.
And that's not what them, and that has never been in the plans. That has never been in the plans by any senator or congressman I've talked to. But most of all, I know Senator Ted Cruz and I know Congressman Chris Smith have been working on legislation on this for years and years because it's the right thing to do. It's not for mineral rights. It's because it's the right thing to do. I've spoken with these men. It has nothing to do with mineral rights.
That's good to hear. I know that a lot of people are skeptical, a lot of times rightly, about our government. So it's good to hear your firsthand understanding of that. Let me give you one more challenge, and then let's go to solutions. Other people are characterizing the nature of these attacks as "quote unquote" banditry. So, for example, on X, you responded to a news headline that read, "quote 9 killed, several abducted as bandits mount coordinated attacks on Kaduna communities," end quote. And you said in response on X, again, quote, "Again, this is a perfect example of the war on words. They're calling these attackers bandits when they darn well know that it's the Islamist Fulani ethnic militia that are doing these attacks. Stop the word games," end quote. So help us
Yes.
understand what's going on there. What's the significance of anyone wanting to call this banditry as opposed to anything else?
Here's the interesting thing. So you have all these attacks that take place. Okay. So just one example, Father's Day in June, just this last year, or just in this year, 280 Christians were slaughtered. Okay. Half of them were burned alive. The other half were killed trying to escape being burned alive. Right. The eyewitnesses that survived knew who the attackers were, knew what language they're speaking. The Nigerian government had advance warning that this attack was going to take place and did nothing. There was even internal intelligence it's called the Nigerian DSS, which is essentially their FBI. They knew in their own intelligence that this attack was going to happen and who was going to do the attacking. The government sat back and did nothing. But when it came out and it hit the press, it was bandits, unknown gunmen. Every attack that happens against Christians in Nigeria is done by unknown gunmen or bandits. It's very nebulous.
So it's a way of protecting the identity because it's a PR scheme, basically, right? We don't want to actually say that we don't want to assign it to an ethnicity. We don't want to say it's the Fulani. We don't want to assign it to a religion. We don't want to say that it's Islam. So it is bandits. Is that correct?
It's bandits, unknown gunmen. And sometimes they'll just say herders.
And is the sole motivation for that? I mean, maybe not the sole, but is the primary motivation that because of what we were talking about, that they're getting the money, that they are just saying, okay, well, we'll acknowledge that there have been attacks, but we won't name it. We won't say who you are. Just keep giving us the money. Is that the primary reason? Or is it that they're Muslim officials and so they're protecting their own co-religionists?
No, they're Muslim officials protecting their own co-religionists.
Okay, so it's both that and the money then. So those two things go hand in hand.
It's money. Well, it's money on some level. It's money on some, and then it's also them protecting their own.
And the Christians who are in government at different levels, because this is something else that I've seen people saying, oh, this title, that belongs to a Christian and this one belongs to a Christian. You kind of mentioned that earlier in the past. They're trying to balance that more. But it looks like there are still some officials who are supposedly Christian. Are they not actually Christian, or do they just have no impact in the roles that they're in? I mean, how does that play into it?
Their God is money.
So even these so-called Christians are basically taking the money and turning a blind eye.
Yeah. It is unbelievable. And so I'll kind of explain what happens is that at very high levels of certain denominations in the Nigerian government, right? All right. In certain high denominational levels, like leaders of, like a Lutheran denomination, leaders of ECWA, which is Evangelical Church Winning All. That's a big denomination in Nigeria. Pastors on the ground will start coming out and speaking out, and they'll get threatened their church and position if they don't shut up. So mid-level pastors and pastors that are on the ground that are watching their communities get slaughtered, and they start coming out and speaking out, they get punished by the higher ups in their denominations.
Wow. So there's a lot of corruption within the church.
There's a lot of corruption within the church in Nigeria, and it makes me sick. And which is what
that makes all the theological training that you're doing all the more important.
Correct.
Because it's affecting this in multiple ways that we've talked about.
Well, not only do we teach them not, to ditch the pietism and to apply Lord Jesus Christ to every aspect of their life, including their businesses and politics, and protecting their villages, we also teach them ethics. Like, we actually go through ethics training and ethics training according to the biblical principles because of the corruption. I mean, this is how we are trying to correct some of these theological things. But I have seen so many people and so many Christian leaders come out and sell out on a repeated basis, to sell the people out. Won't even acknowledge that attacks are going on in certain areas. Say, oh, I don't know what's going on there.
Okay, so it's depressing and hard to hear all of this, but what can be done? I want to talk about three primary avenues of this. Number one, the Nigerian government. Number two, the U.S. government. Number three, we'll end with talking about your organization and what you need help with going forward. So when it comes to the Nigerian government, obviously you can't just like walk in there one day and make them not be corrupt. You can't make the Christian church be not corrupt overnight.
Correct.
But what is there anything that, say, within the next year could happen that would be within the realm of the Nigerian government that would work toward a solution on this? I mean, what would you love to see happen in 12 months in the Nigerian government that's actually possible, short of a miracle?
New candidates that have been trained, tested by fire, that are real Christian candidates to get in power and get into office all across the board, starting at local governments all the way up. Nigeria needs a Christian president. And one of the things I'd like to see the international community do is come in and actually make sure there's fair elections in Nigeria.
When is the next election scheduled for?
I believe it's next year.
And the last time there was a Christian president was when?
It was 3 terms ago. So that would have been 12 years ago.
So if the first thing that comes to mind when I ask what you can do with the Nigerian government is we need to get somebody who's a Christian in power, does that mean that if a Christian does not come to power, you have very little hope for what the government is going to do as long as it's Muslims who are in power?
Well, I wish that the international community and the U.S. government would make them an offer they can't refuse.
Okay, so talk about that. Talk about the pressure that can be put on by the U.S. government. What can our government do?
What our government can do is the lowest level thing is designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. That's the legislation being pushed forward. I like what Ted Cruz is doing, which is calling for sanctions against Nigerian politicians and terror leaders that are allowing for these human rights abuses to happen. I think just international pressure. So and acknowledge that there's a genocide happening in Nigeria. So here's the thing. If you acknowledge there's a genocide happening in Nigeria, they don't get World Bank money. A lot of international funding and aid funding drops from them. So there are incentives and things we could put in place to get them to behave properly.
And apparently money talks a lot in Nigeria, as we've been talking about. So even if there's no Christian that gets in power there, if the Muslim government is willing to take money, at least that is some kind of temporary pressure, maybe not in the long run, but at least that is important temporary pressure that's coming from the international community saying, we are not going to allow you to keep doing this. And then they're going to have to do something. If that pressure were appropriately applied and they said, yes, we're going to take your money and we're going to do something, what would be the action that you want them to take that would actually be effective in stopping this?
For the Nigerian government to do what its initial function was supposed to be doing, which is protect the innocent and punish evil, instead of killing the innocent and rewarding evil, which is what they've been doing. We need to get them to flip the script. I just like to see them to protect their own citizens so Nigerians can live peaceably and have normal lives.
So if the U.S. passes this to say, okay, Nigeria, this is a country of particular concern, what tangible effects does that actually have? Because that doesn't necessarily mean there will be sanctions coming out of that, if I understand correctly. And I see all this talk about a CPC, and it sounds so vague, right? Now you're of concern. So what happens now if you're a concern?
Well, then there's more U.S. resources designated to monitoring and looking into what's going on, but it also hurts. It also hurts their funding from the U.S. Any kind of funding that we're giving them and working with them, it hurts their funding from the U.S. But like I said, I want something with more teeth, like with what Ted Cruz is going for, actual sanctions. And I'd like to designate Nigeria as a country that's committing genocide, because now you're really putting the screws to the country and we'll hopefully see better behavior out of them. That's at the very minimal. I mean, I love it if the U.S. government sent military in to take out the terrorists. But I that's just me personally, and I probably won't go that far, but at the very minimum extent, we can lay a lot of pressure just by signing some papers and using words.
And do you believe right now that there's going to be enough support that we will pass that?
There's a lot of support going for it, but we have to fix some people in the administration, direct in Trump's cabinet. Masad Bulus, who's Trump's envoy to Africa, who's a senior advisor to Trump, who's Tiffany Trump's Tiffany Trump's father-in-law, is the envoy to Africa. And he just came out a few days ago and said there's not a genocide against Christians. And he spouted off literally every Muslim talking point from Nigeria that was said. So that was a punch in the gut for us. But the problem is Masad Bulus is hanging out with the rich guys, the wealthy politicians. He's getting his information from the wrong people. And I guarantee he has not set foot on the ground where people are being killed and actually seen it for himself. It's easy to fly in a private jet and isolate yourself and stay at the fanciest hotel in Nigeria and smoke cigars and talk with the guys instead of taking yourself and going and seeing what's really happening on the ground. And unfortunately, that's the problem with a lot of our U.S. personnel. Our people in the embassy in Abuja have never set foot outside the embassy. They have no idea what's happening just 50 kilometers away.
How can they not? Obviously they're hearing all of this. Why are they not getting out there to actually investigate for themselves?
The Nigerian government are sending all the people in. Oh, don't worry about that. That's not what's being said. No, it's not what you think. And they parrot the Nigerian government talking points. And so that's, like I said,
I find that hard to, I find that hard to believe that they don't know better. Not you hard to believe, but it's hard for me to believe that they don't know better, because if you see so much about something, even if you're hearing a different story, don't you want to go and check it out for yourself? If you have some impact on whether or not people are being wiped out, systematically killed, do you not go out and check this out for yourself? It's hard for me to imagine that that's not willful blindness.
Let me give your audience a bit of a wake-up call on how the government works. Is they only do what they're told to do. So during the Biden years, their operating directive, this is our vision, our focus on for the embassy in Abuja, right? Their operating directive was LGBTQ issues, was pushing feminism, was pushing their social issues in Nigeria was their operating directive. So if anything outside of the operating directive happens, they're not paying attention to it because their 9-to-5 job is pushing feminism, LGBTQ issues, yada, yada, yada. That's it. And they have no interest in doing anything but their operating directive.
And so now you have a new administration, but people are still functioning from the same mentality when they're
Correct.
there doing what they are doing as government workers. And you're saying maybe they're not pushing those social issues anymore like they were under the Biden administration, but they're also not super motivated to get out there and see what else is going on. That's fair?
Correct. Well, though it's another notch on their government career belt. Oh, I served in Nigeria for a year. I'm going to go move on to the next embassy. I'm going to go move on to this next thing. It's just another notch. They don't care about Nigerians or what's actually happening in the country. That's been my experience. And I've met with them several times.
Well, as Christians, we are called to care, and you are doing incredible work in this caring. So let's end with this and talking about what you're doing, regardless of what happens with the government in the U.S. or the government in Nigeria. You continue to work, and you have been working. What are your highest priority projects right now and your financial needs specifically? And I just want to kind of key my audience into why I'm asking this, because before we started recording this podcast, I mentioned to Judd that I've been seeing him a lot online lately doing interviews. And I said, is this the algorithm that it's just all of a sudden I started following you and now it's just showing me everything that you do? Have you always been doing this many interviews? Has it been an uptick? And he said, no, there's been a big uptick specifically because Bill Maher talked about this, who obviously is not a Christian. And so he has been doing a lot more interviews and getting a lot more out there on some huge podcasts. And I said, how is that connecting to what you're actually seeing in terms of people making contributions to the work? Because one thing definitely when you do interviews is you want to get awareness, right? So he's definitely getting awareness out there, but also you hope that from that awareness, people then go to the interest stage of wanting to help and be part of this. And he said that, and I'm just summarizing what we talked about before, and I'll have you elaborate on this, but he said that very little relative to what you would expect given the audience sizes. And so I'm just going to be really honest with our listeners and say, if you've heard all of this and if your heart is moved and you're feeling convicted, like Somebody needs to be doing something. Christians who are theologically sound and understand how we're to help our brothers and sisters in Christ, who are aware of what's going on, we need to be doing something in tangible ways. Of course, you should be praying. I hope that everyone who listens to this will take a minute and pray for what's going on. There have been a lot of really practical points that we've talked about here that you can pray for, but also if you have the financial resources to contribute in some way, please consider that. Please consider not just hearing everything we've been talking about, but how you can partner. And I'm sure even small contributions can be helpful because those small contributions add up. So with that in mind, that's why I'm asking Judd this to end this conversation. What are your high priority projects? And tell us about your financial needs so that if people are moved to give, what is that money going toward right now that is on your heart, that you're thinking, if only all these interviews turned into this, we could do that?
So I'll say this. Currently, there's over 3.5 million Christians that have been driven from their homes, living in absolute squalor. They're living in camps. They're starving to death. They need medicine. They need food. So immediately, what our resources are going to is our resources are being drained because we keep responding to all the killings and the attacks that take place. So we're responding to the killings and attacks, but then you're talking about thousands and thousands of people that have been driven from their homes, living in absolute squalor in camps. Now I'm talking garbage bag makeshift tents that they made themselves. They're sleeping on dirt. They need food. They need sanitation. And when you donate, that is where we're putting our resources in, is trying to help rebuild as much as we can, rebuild lives of persecuted Christians on the ground. They've lost everything. Imagine you're making $100 a month. That's the average salary of a Nigerian, of what they earn, $100 a month. Now imagine all that being ripped away from you. Everything you owned, which was very little, is now gone. So we need to get in more to these camps. They need food, they need aid, they need medicine. And going back to the narrative, I just want to get this so your audience understands this, is that 60% of the camps that exist, the Nigerian government refuses to acknowledge that they exist. So they get no help from the UN. There's no Red Cross. There's no international organizations going in and helping them because the Nigerian government says they don't exist. And these are the camps and the type of people we put our focus on. So 80% of all donations coming into our organization go toward the field. We're trying to get to a point where we're 90-10. But I'm just a small organization. All that I have, me in the United States, it's just me and one full-time assistant and 2 part-timers. That's our staff in America. I have a staff of 150 in Nigeria doing the Lord's work. But we need more funds to respond to attacks. We need more funds to help equip villages to prevent persecution. But we also need a lot of support to help those that are displaced. And that's where your money's going.
Well, I appreciate that so much. And like I said, Judd did not come on here saying, "Hey, can I sponsor a podcast to talk about my organization?" He wasn't here because he was fundraising. I'm the one who brought this up when we were talking beforehand because I was just curious if the awareness was translating into actual income for an organization that's doing this really important work. And so I just want to make that clear. This was not him saying that he wanted to come in and discuss that. He just came on here to talk about what's going on in Nigeria. But this is me saying, "Hey, you guys, can we be different? Can all the Christians who are listening to this podcast," and there are thousands of you, there are thousands of listeners to every single podcast that I drop. If everyone took the time to say, you know what, I'm not going to be one of those people who just listens and doesn't do anything. If everyone did that, there would be a substantial amount of income that could come into this organization and actually make this effort even greater than it is. So please do take the time to consider how to do that. And Judd, when people want to donate, where do they go to do that?
So go to equippingthepersecuted.org. That's all one word, equippingthepersecuted.org. We do what we say, and we give regular updates on what we're doing every week. You can look at our progress, but that's equippingthepersecuted.org. Anything you can donate is much appreciated, and it's going to be doing the Lord's work.
And I'll have a link to that in the show notes just to make it easy for people. But definitely follow Equipping the Persecuted also as an organization. So, Judd, just tell them where to find you on social media also. I want to make sure that they can go to those places, because it's really easy to hear about something like this and think, oh, wow, that's really important. I'm glad I know about that. And then you just go moving on with your day. But I can tell you, because I've started following your site and your work, I can tell you that every time I see your posts come up, it's a reminder to me of what else is going on in the world that I need to be concerned with. And it's so important. So I hope people will also follow you, even if you can't make a donation right now. Go follow Equipping the Persecuted so that you're aware and continually reminded about what's going on in the rest of the world. So where are you primarily active with respect to social media?
So x.com, Judd Saul, look up Judd Saul on x.com. I also encourage you to look at Truth Nigeria. It's x.com. It's Truth Nigeria 123. Go to Truth Nigeria on Facebook. Go to Equipping the Persecuted on Facebook. And again, my name, Judd Saul, JuddSaul. Follow me and get updated on what's going on. And we'd love to interact and look forward to meeting you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Like I said, I know you've been doing a lot of different interviews lately, and I learned so much from this. I've been reading on my own to kind of get an idea what's going on, but there's nothing like hearing it from someone who's there and completely immersed in what's happening. So thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you for having me on. I cannot thank you enough for raising awareness about this. God bless you.
Thank you so much.